Remedy Entertainment is one of my all-time favorite developers. They have made some of my all-time favorite games. They have a wonderful personality that makes their games feel alive. They always show an immeasurable amount of respect towards the fans who made them a successful developer in the first place, and they have one of the most wholesome communities ever. I love Remedy. They aren't a flawless developer by any means, but their games are so well put together that I can forgive their shortcomings. Despite pretty much all of Remedy's games receiving praise, there is one game of theirs which is the most mixed out of the bunch: Quantum Break. After Alan Wake's release in 2010, Remedy wanted to make a sequel, but while the game was praised by critics, it didn't sell very well, and thus Microsoft had no interest in continuing the series and instead wanted Remedy to work on something else. One of the ideas Remedy had for Alan Wake 2 was a live-action TV show, and Microsoft liked this idea, so they decided to develop a game around it. The idea of narrative choices was also added in later, and then the idea of time travel and quantum mechanics came from the Night Springs episodes in Alan Wake. Not much else is known about the game's development. It started in 2011, and then the game released on the 5th of April 2016 for Xbox One and PC. In terms of sales, Quantum Break seemed to do very well as it exceeded sales expectations. Either way, responses to the game were mixed, with some criticizing the TV show element for being a pointless inclusion and the combat being clunky. But, since we all know how much I love Remedy, I thought I would take a look back on their most polarizing game. The game starts off with a montage of events that will take place later in the game, and some narration by Iceman.
The number one killer is time. It destroys us all. This is what you need to know. Time broke. A growing fracture leading to the end of time. We went after a device that could fix it. Things turned ugly. Paul Serene was there to stop us. He has superpowers.
Jack.
Him and me both. We failed.
Jack.
And of course, time travel was involved.
Jack.
Going too fast for you?
Yes, Sean Ashmore plays the main character, Jack Joyce. I grew up watching the X-Men films, so to see him in a Remedy game is really cool. Anyway, Remedy's games have always featured a lot of exposition. Obviously, the issue with exposition is that you're telling the story and not showing it. Remedy have found ways around this, however. The exposition the characters give in their games demonstrates the personality of the character. Max Payne will often speak in metaphors, which shows his unique way of thinking and analyzing a situation.
Outside, the mercury was falling fast. It was colder than the devil's heart, raining ice pitchforks as if the heavens were ready to fall. Vinnie Gognitti was running scared. He could run, but with a bullet in the stomach like a broken bottle of Tabasco, he was quickly running out of time. Gognitti ran out of steam in a dead-end alley with steam boiling out of the sewer grates like all the fires of hell were burning high beneath us. It was shakedown time.
Or Alan Wake will talk about the situation from a writer's perspective, cluing you in to how his creative mind works when creating stories.
A story is not a machine that does what you tell it. A story is a beast with a life of its own. You can create it, shape it, but as the story grows, it starts wanting things of its own. Change one thing and you set off a chain reaction of events that spreads through the whole thing. The characters have to be true to themselves. The events need to follow a logic that fits the story. A single flaw and the magic is gone. The story dies. Alice dies.
It's a nice way to get essential information across whilst also developing the character and making the exposition more interesting. And both work thematically with the games, since Alan Wake is the one creating the story in his game and Max is his own storyteller. Obviously, Remedy want to do the same with Quantum Break. The entire story is told in retrospective, with Jack flashing back to the events of the game. However, unlike the narration in Remedy's previous games, this just feels thrown in. Jack's narration mostly just says stuff we already know, or points out obvious things. Rarely does it develop his character.
You made a long trip just to see a research project?
Well, reading between the lines, Paul was under a lot of pressure. He needed a friend. I wanted to help him any way I could.
Roger. We'll have the
the chopper.
Seeing Paul's face on that screen, it was some kind of sick reminder. I couldn't escape what had happened, what he did. I needed to know why, but part of me wanted to put a fucking bullet in his head before he could open his mouth.
In fact, it doesn't really make sense because he's being questioned after the events of the game, yet there are multiple instances where he will avoid spoiling the game's future events, even when it would make sense to bring future context into the situations he talks about.
Will never told you what he did in that workshop? At Ground Zero?
No, never. He hid that part of his life from me. Nothing prepared me for the weirdness that was waiting there. And even that was just a prelude to the bad stuff that would follow in that same place later.
I know Remedy like narration, but it just doesn't work here. So, we then head to the start of the game's events, where Jack Joyce heads to Riverport University, where Paul Serene, played by Aidan Gillen, is creating a time machine. There is some items and characters you can interact with on the way, and there is even an Alan Wake reference. In fact, there are quite a few Alan Wake references in the game, which means that Alan Wake, Quantum Break, and Control are all set in the same universe. It's a cool idea, but it causes an issue for the game tone-wise, which I will explain later. Anyway, the world building in Quantum Break is pretty weak if I'm honest. Most of the collectibles you can find don't add anything of value to the story. The only ones that do are the ones related to the main characters, which begs the question of why have them here in the first place. The items you could interact with in Max Payne developed Max's worldview and his perspective on certain philosophies. It also added more perspective to the enemies you face, and they even had news reports to keep you updated on the situation with the police and just how hard they were trying to capture Max. In Max Payne 2, the TV shows were parallel to the narrative that was going on. Alan Wake's manuscripts were what was creating the story, and it told the future events for the game in the context of Alan's exaggerated writing. It kept you interested by what the words on the page mean in the literal sense. Quantum Break's items tell you stuff you already know, like the protests against the big bad corporation Monarch shutting down the library, or develop characters or events you never see and thus have no attachment to. The collectibles with the main characters are cool, especially Jack's brother Will and all his time travel shenanigans, but other than that, they don't add anything to the narrative. You could cut them from the game and nothing would be lost. Not to mention that in Remedy's previous games, any story items or collectibles were narrated by the main character, whereas in this game they aren't, which ultimately makes it a less enjoyable experience to read them. Hearing Sean Ashmore narrate this would have made getting all the collectibles more enjoyable, and I would have more incentive to do so. He does comment on some things, but not enough to give you incentive to interact with them. Anyway, Jack meets up with Paul, and there is some great characterization here. You can tell these two have been friends for a long time.
Jack Joyce. In the flesh.
The esteemed Mr. Paul Serene. What's shaking, Moneybags?
Shut up and bring it in. Welcome home. 6 years. And I was starting to think you'd never come back.
Yeah, me too.
Come on.
I'm trying to avoid talking too much about the characters or story itself, because I'll be covering all that in the story section. For now, just bear with me. Anyway, Jack helps Paul test out the time machine by sending Paul 2 minutes to the past.
Remember this moment.
Paul! What? How?
It's fine. It's okay. Stay calm, Jack.
Stay calm. There's two of you. You just fucking multiplied.
The machine runs on something called chronon particles, which is important to Paul's character and Jack's as well. They then need to send Paul back to the future in order to complete the loop, but before they can do anything, Jack's brother William then comes in and stops them, which then causes the core of the machine to malfunction and disrupt.
No, I gotta let you out.
Time has now completely stopped. Jack and Paul are both unaffected, however, because their exposure to chronon particles gave them time powers. Sure. Can I just say that this game looks ridiculously beautiful? Remedy have always been at the top of their game when it comes to graphics, and Quantum Break is no exception. All the character models and facial animations look so good that some parts of the game genuinely look like live action, which I guess is fitting. The lighting, the shadows, the physics, the texture work, everything looks absolutely amazing in this game. The time effects are my favourite aspect of the visuals. The entire world looks like it's collapsing through time. However, the game runs like absolute rubbish on PC, and an issue with the visuals is that they often look blurry. You can't turn off motion blur or depth of field, and the anti-aliasing looks strange on some surfaces. Look at Paul's face here, for example. I don't know what causes this, but there are mods to fix this issue. It's nothing major, but during some story sections I definitely noticed the characters' faces being blurry. But overall, Quantum Break looks absolutely fabulous. Back to the game, Will and Jack then escape the underground lab as a Monarch team is sent in to explore and capture both of them. Jack then discovers that he has time powers and uses it to save Will and then escape the underground facility.
No!
Jack. You just... What just... Go. This way. Move.
Which means it's now time for me to talk about Quantum Break's gameplay. While Remedy call themselves storytellers, they have always been great in the gameplay department. Max Payne 1 and 2 are still masterpieces with great level progression and level design, fun gameplay mechanics, and a variety of scenarios and weapons to test out these mechanics. Alan Wake is a simplistic survival horror-esque game, but the challenge of resource management, combined with trying to kill the Taken as quickly and as effectively as possible, made it fun. How does Quantum Break's gameplay fare? Quantum Break takes cues from Max Payne with its time mechanics, except now it turns them into superpowers. Time Stop allows Jack to send out chronon particles to stop time in specific areas, which is useful for focusing your damage on specific enemies as you can fire more bullets into them, or allowing you to focus on other enemies while the other one is stopped. It's a fun power, but it becomes useless for the stutter sections where time completely stops, because the enemies in those sections aren't affected by it. And these sections happen a lot, especially later in the game, and so you often won't be able to use this ability to its full extent. Time Dodge is a dash function which allows you to dash to cover or into enemies, which slows down time, allowing you to deal more damage. It's probably my favourite time power in the game, as it encourages the player to be more offensive and aggressive, and it has a risk versus reward factor where you put yourself in harm's way by using it against enemies, but it also allows you to do more damage to them. Time Shield sets up a dome around you which also regenerates your health and deflect bullets shot at you. Time Blast allows you to build up chronon particles and then blast them at a group of enemies, either killing them or seriously damaging them. The trade-off is that you can't move when performing this, and so you have to give up mobility for power. And Time Rush is similar to Dodge, although you get full control on where you run to. There is also Time Vision, which allows you to see enemies more clearly and key objects in the environment which can be used in combat. The time powers are actually a lot of fun, and unlike most console shooters, keep in mind this game was developed for Xbox One, the game encourages you to stay on the move and play aggressively, only retreating when you've taken too much damage. But even then, the shield helps with that. You can experiment with different combinations of time powers to cause as much damage as possible, and all the powers recharge at a rate where you'll have at least one time power available to you at all times. And the game encourages you to get as much use out of these abilities as possible. You gradually get more time powers as you progress through the game, and there is an upgrade system, but it's so useless and forgettable that I'm not surprised nobody mentions it. However, the time powers are the only saving grace that makes this game bearable, because otherwise, Quantum Break is either mediocre or bad in every other aspect of its gameplay. The shooting mechanics are pretty bad. Guns are laughably inaccurate, making burst fire attacks from rifles the most effective way to play. Why are pistols more effective at taking down a group of enemies than an assault rifle? The pistol has unlimited ammo, and while it doesn't do as much damage, the accuracy of the gun makes it more effective at killing enemies at medium to long range more than any rifle that isn't a burst rifle. Which means that full auto rifles are meant to be used at close range, but the game already has shotguns which are more effective at killing enemies at close range, so there's really no motivation to use full auto weapons. The movement controls in this game are so awkward because this game suffers from the same issue that Max Payne 3 suffered from. Any movement in the game has momentum behind it, which doesn't translate well to a mouse and keyboard, and since the game has to chain animations of the player together, it means the game often has to finish certain animations before it can move on to the next one. This issue isn't as prominent in Quantum Break if you play with a controller. In fact, I'd say this is one of the only shooting games where I would say playing with a controller is the better option. Lock-on with the triggers feels smooth, and momentum-based movement is much more slick and smooth with the joystick than the keyboard. So if you are going to play this game, play with a controller. The level design ranges from okay to bad. There are some sections which are pretty solid. They feature plenty of ways to traverse the arena. The level geometry and cover is spread out enough that each piece of cover has its own uses, but the issue is that the arenas have almost no ways to plan ahead. With some exceptions, most of the time the game will just throw you into an arena where you have to immediately start fighting and don't have a chance to get a grasp on the situation. This works for corridor fights where the player is navigating a level as if it was a maze, but when it's a combat arena, you have to let the player get their bearings first before throwing them into combat. Sometimes the game will do this, but then other times it's just like, yo dog, here's a shotgunner, he's gonna kill you right now. Not to mention that some areas have a clear strategy which is the most effective one, and there is no reason to play through the arena in any other way. Whether it just be circling around the arena, shooting the enemies, or pausing behind each piece of cover and then taking out enemies from long range, a lot of arenas have this issue. Yes, there are other ways to play through these sections, but if there is a strategy that consistently works every single time you do it, then players will just continuously spam that tactic. The enemies in the game are also pretty pathetic. They will often charge your position with no thought of their own safety. This works in a game like Max Payne because you're always the underdog in every situation. In that game, you die in a handful of shots, and the only advantage you have over the enemies is bullet time. The AI in Max Payne isn't the smartest. I mean, the games were made in 2001 and 2003, but the game would use a mixture of scripted sections, like enemies retreating or throwing grenades at the player to flush them out, or giving them power positions in the level which made it easier for them to kill the player. It made each enemy unique because some would hunt you down to the ends of the earth, some would wait behind corners until you came passing by, or some would be given a sniper rifle with a grenade launcher and a power position, and thus posed a more unique threat. Max Payne's challenge didn't come from the AI itself, it came from well-scripted and designed combat scenarios. Remedy knew their limits and didn't try to base the game around the limit, but what the limit could be utilized for. Quantum Break, however, doesn't have any of this. Since the AI is dumb as rocks, it means them charging you just makes it easier for you to kill them since you have superpowers and your health regenerates. Them retreating has no effect since you can easily hunt them down with the dash and time rush options. There are no power positions in any of the arenas apart from the snipers. There are tougher enemies you face, but they're just the generic big dude with weak spot on his back, and they are super easy to deal with. They do take more time to deal with than other enemies because of their health bar, but in terms of actual difficulty, all you have to do is just circle around them and then take cover. The issue is that most of the time when these guys show up, they are often only accompanied by 2 regular dudes, and thus there is really nothing to stop you from abusing this tactic. On to the cover mechanic, Remedy decided to go with an automatic cover system where Jack crouches when he gets within a certain distance to the object. The issue is that the distance is never really clear and you can't shoot enemies from behind cover reliably. A blind fire option would have been appreciated. What's also frustrating is that not all the buttons on the controller are used, so it's not like there isn't a way to add a crouch or cover button, which would have made the cover more reliable as the player would have more control over it. Also, as you've probably guessed from everything I've said so far, yes, this game is far too easy. You have superpowers that can overpower literally everything in the game easily. And since you have regenerating health, it means that any damage you take can be negated easily by just putting up a time shield or hiding behind cover for 5 seconds. The issue of the player being overpowered wouldn't nearly be as bad if the levels weren't as flat and had more unique challenges for the player. That way, even if the game is too easy, you are still getting unique combat scenarios which switch up the gameplay. For example, Max Payne 2 is much easier than the first game, arguably more fair, but the game is always throwing new and unique combat scenarios at you to keep you entertained, whereas Quantum Break's combat scenarios all feel the exact same and all provide the exact same experience for the most part, which is why I can't forgive the easy difficulty in this game as much as I can in Max Payne 2. And that's about it in terms of combat. The thing is that none of the issues I've listed are big problems in of themselves, but when they are combined together, they make a very unengaging gameplay loop. The time powers are the only saving grace of this game's combat because you can do some fun stuff with it, but the actual gunplay, enemies, and level design make the combat fall apart for the reasons I've listed. Quantum Break's gameplay is just mediocre and as a whole is very boring. But there's an even bigger issue here, and that is that you don't even partake all that much in combat in the game. Most of the levels are around 20 to 30 minutes long, and you'll spend less than half of that in combat. Most of the time, the level will just mainly consist of exploring the level, trying to get from point A to point B. The game tries to keep you entertained with puzzles, but I fail to call these puzzles because they're almost automatic. The puzzles mainly just consist of rewinding time to create platforms to use, or stopping time to create platforms to move around, or to just get through doors. There's no challenge behind them whatsoever. The rest of the level will then just consist of walking around and cutscenes. You spend more time walking through scripted sections and watching cutscenes than you do actually playing the game, and it makes replaying the game a nightmare because the ratio from gameplay to story is in the latter's favour. Probably the worst example is Act 4. The game is split into 5 acts, and Act 4 is the most story heavy in the game. This act took me around 64 minutes to beat, and only 7 minutes of this entire act contained combat, which means only 10% of the entire act has actual gameplay. What? The worst part is that the only combat sections in this act are right at the beginning and right at the end, and there is a 33-minute gap between them. 33 minutes without proper gameplay where all you do is walk around in scripted sections and watch cutscenes. Was this game made by Hideo Kojima? Well, I mean, Sam Lake is in Death Stranding, and Kojima makes a cameo in Control, so who knows. Either way, this is unacceptable. Of course, the entire game isn't like this, but you'll still spend sometimes less than a third of the act partaking in combat. It gets worse when you include the TV episodes, which go on for 24 minutes apiece. Now, I'll be fair and I won't include them in this discussion, since the TV show isn't a part of the game and is a separate thing, but the fact that you spend most of the game itself watching cutscenes or just walking around, and then you watch 24-minute episodes on top of that, means you spend most of the game not playing it. Max Payne and Alan Wake are story-driven games, but I don't think anyone is ever going to argue that you spend more time watching the game than playing it. Max Payne 1 is around 7 to 10 hours long and has around an hour's worth of cutscenes. Max Payne 2 is around 4 or 5 hours long and, again, has around an hour's worth of cutscenes. which means a larger percentage of the game is spent watching cutscenes, but only around a fifth or a quarter of the game doesn't have you playing it. Alan Wake is around 10 hours long and has around 1 or 1.5 hours worth of cutscenes, although there are some walk-in sections which add on an extra half hour or an hour to the game, but even then, you're still playing a substantial more of the game than you are watching it. Quantum Break is 8 hours long and has 4 or 5 hours worth of cutscenes, and that isn't even taking into account all the walk-in sections, which easily add on another hour onto the game, which means you will spend less than 40% of the game actually playing it. To be clear, these are all rough estimates for all these games, so the actual ratio for story to gameplay may vary on your playthrough, but the point still remains that Quantum Break has a terrible ratio of story to gameplay, and it means the game doesn't have much replay value other than its story. For those who just want to jump in and kick some ass, you will constantly have to deal with dumb scripted walk-in sections or cutscenes. While the cutscenes can be skipped, the walk-in sections can't. Alan Wake has walk-in sections, but it only has like 1 per episode, and they only last for a couple minutes at most, and then the rest of the episode is actual combat and exploration. There isn't any exploration in Quantum Break because the levels are so linear and all the collectibles are really easy to find. In conclusion, Quantum Break's gameplay is boring. The time powers are the only saving grace, the game is too easy, the gunplay is unresponsive, the enemies are brain dead and easy to fight, the levels all play the exact same, and you spend less than half of the game actually playing it. It honestly pains me that I am criticizing Remedy this much, because as everyone knows, I love Remedy. I love them. But I can't look past this. What happened, Remedy? You went from creating the best video games of all time to creating a boring one. As most of you will know, I value gameplay over story in a video game. That doesn't mean the story isn't important to me, but what it means is that I can forgive a lackluster story if the gameplay is awesome, but it doesn't work vice versa. However, the story is the only other thing in Quantum Break that can make it a worthwhile experience, because the gameplay sucks so much. And Remedy are known for creating some of the best narratives in the industry, so let's see if that's still true. Quantum Break's story follows Jack Joyce, aka Iceman. Okay, I'll stop making that joke. Jack's objective throughout the entire game is to stop Paul Serene, who went back in time to 1999 to form Monarch and fix time, since time is broken.
Explosion make time go bad. If time is an egg, then that egg is fucking broken. The time egg is fucked.
What? Why is there an egg in this?
Every once in a while, a stutter occurs. A stutter is when time completely stops, but since Jack and Paul both have time powers, they are unaffected by them. However, the stutters become more frequent and more unstable as the game progresses, to the point that time starts smashing into itself, and if it isn't fixed, then this will be how the universe is destroyed. What I love about the story is the scale. Quantum Break is tackling a universe-level threat of time collapsing, yet it never feels universe-level, and the game always keeps things down to earth with the characters. You always understand the consequences of you failing and how big the level of destruction those consequences would bring, but you always feel like part of the picture, not the picture. The game is trying to pull off stakes at both a personal and public level, and does so very well. One of the reasons it works is because all the characters in this game are awesome. Jack Joyce is a relatable character. We don't know too much about his past or his history with the other characters, but it doesn't feel disconnected. He's experiencing all these crazy time travel shenanigans at the same time you are, and is coming to terms with it along with you. When Paul multiplies in the beginning, you're lost for thought the same way he is. Shawn Ashmore is also one of the most chill and down-to-earth actors ever, and it really comes across in his performance. Jack is obviously angry, but he tries to bury all that emotion and stay level-headed.
I'm not turning my back on the human race. At this point, they're a necessary sacrifice.
Is that what Will was? Necessary sacrifice?
Will refused to believe the inevitability of what was coming. And he became an obstacle.
Answer me this question, Paul. In everything you've seen, do I stop before you're dead?
He's always trying his best to save the day and other characters, and he's smug without being an arsehole. He works well as a likeable protagonist. Paul Serene is also a great antagonist. He is aware of the stutters and has spent 17 years preparing for them, which means he never tried to stop them. He created the Lifeboat Protocol, which is a stutter-proof bunker, and thus life can continue inside the bunker. Paul constantly claims that he has seen the end of time, and that the Lifeboat Protocol is the only option. What's interesting is that his motives aren't evil. He's trying to save people from the stutters with the lifeboat. He uses a device named the Chronon Field Regulator, aka the CFR, or the countermeasure as the game sometimes calls it. It is used to repair fractures in time, and Paul uses it for the lifeboat. However, Jack is trying to use it to fix time itself, but Paul is against that since it puts the Lifeboat Protocol at risk. It's an interesting conflict because both are trying to save lives, but Jack is obviously in the right because he's trying to save the entire world, not just a couple people. Paul is clearly a villain though. I mean, he kills your brother in the first act and can become hugely unstable depending on your choices. There are some sections where you get to play as Paul, and these parts are where you get to make choices within the story that will change future events. I admire the effort, but the choice system is mostly pointless because the amount it changes is maybe 20% of the game at most. There'll maybe be a few lines of dialogue changed, or maybe a slightly different combat encounter, or a different cutscene, but for the most part, nothing changes. The TV show is impacted more by your decisions, but once again, they don't change much. This is something I'm tired of in narrative games with choices. What's the point in giving me the option to choose a different path in the story if no meaningful changes come from it? I understand that making each choice completely unique would completely change the narrative in certain instances and would cost a lot more money to do so, but then the question comes of why do these choices in the first place? Back to the characters, Will doesn't appear much in the game, but all of his backstory of creating the time machine and his research in conflict with Paul and how Paul stole his research is interesting to read. He also acts as the main motivation for Jack as his death creates his hatred for Paul. Wait a minute, I just noticed something. All of Remedy's characters are motivated by their family. Huh. Also, a piece of trivia here, the names of Remedy's protagonists rhyme with the theme of the game. Anyway, back to the game. Martin Hatch is awesome. He's played by Lance Reddick, who is amazing in everything. Fans of the John Wick films know him as Sharon.
Armor improvements. 12-gauge steel slugs. Armor piercing.
Hatch is an awesome character because he works for Paul, but he's also trying to overthrow him, and often sides with the main characters. He tricks Paul by making him think others are turning against him, and it helps make Paul's struggle more engaging because by the end of the game, pretty much nobody is on his side anymore and he can't trust anyone, and you feel his panic. Hatch also works as an intimidating presence, and it adds more layers to the story, as it's not always clear if he's with you or against you.
What is it that you're so threatened by, Martin?
Do I look threatened to you?
Solid character and performance. Probably my favourite character in the game is Beth Wilder, played by Courtney Hope, who would later play Jesse Faden in Remedy's next game, Control. Courtney's performance as this character is nothing short of amazing. She takes everything seriously, with a little bit of dry humour here and there.
I know your brother built the one thing that can stop the fracture. I know we're meant to find it, and I know Monarch doesn't want us to.
And yet you're wearing their uniform.
I like the way their pants fit.
You can tell she cares about Jack, but she won't let any of his antics get in the way. Act 4 is where her character becomes one of Remedy's best. During Act 4, Beth Wilder needs to go to the 4th of July 2010, since that's when the countermeasure was stolen by Paul. But this woman, Sophia Amaral, who works for Paul, resets the date of the time machine to sometime in the future, and then Jack goes back to 2010 to find Beth from the future.
Beth? It's me. Hey. What happened to you?
We also find out that a future version of Beth came to her when she was younger with a book detailing key events of her life, and how no matter what she does, she cannot stop them. It also details procedures she needs to follow. Beth had to isolate herself from the world in order to stay focused on her mission. She couldn't have any friends or relationships, she needed to change her appearance constantly to stay hidden, constantly train every day for the coming events, and she had to live with the fact that she knew about events such as 9/11 years before they happened, yet could do nothing to stop it no matter what she did. After Jack finds her in 2010, it's revealed that she fought in the future for some time before then chasing Paul back to 1999, which was when the time machine was invented and the earliest it could go back to, since you can't go back further than when the time machine was invented. She had to live this completely isolated life full of nothing but apathy for over 11 years before Jack found her, and even then Paul kills her shortly afterwards, which just makes it all the more tragic when you think about it. Courtney Hope is tremendous at conveying this. There is a reason she became the protagonist for Remedy's next game.
I can't imagine what happened to you. When you entered that machine, I wanted to go after you, but I didn't know where Sophia sent you or how to find you.
You made it here. It's all that matters. You followed the plan.
Whatever happened to you, change it.
Don't.
We can fix this.
Don't.
We can undo this.
You still don't get it. It can't be changed. No matter what we do, the pieces fall in all of the exact same places. I've tried. Over and over.
I can't just sit back and do nothing.
You have to let go. Jack. You have to let go. I've seen it. The end of time. That is where she sent me. I was there. I've been fighting this fight my entire life, and I saw us fail. I saw where this leads. I just don't know anymore. I don't know if we can win this thing.
Then we'll die finding out.
There are other characters in the game, and they're all great too, even if they don't play a huge role in the game. So overall, Quantum Break's story and characters are great. Sam Lake really outdid himself this time.
Check the credits.
Wait, what?
Check the credits.
Okay. Miko Ratatouille, Tyler Smith, and where's my boy Sam? Okay. So this is the first Remedy game where Sam Lake was not the writer. He was still involved with the game as the creative director, and likely did have a lot of involvement with the story, but he wasn't the writer for it. The thing is though, despite the gag a moment ago, I knew this game wasn't written by Sam, because while the story and characters are great, the dialogue isn't Sam.
Better not, Jack. I don't know how Will managed to get here, but forget it.
This is bigger than the two of us. You know time's about to stop for good.
Yes, it is. Hence the lifeboat program.
A bunch of desperate people sitting around in a bunker somewhere waiting for the inevitable? Jesus, Paul.
You stole the CFR, Jack.
I stole it?
And the plan depends on it. So, I'll take that back now, please.
I can't do that.
I know.
Sam's dialogue is metaphorical and exaggerated, not just with the main character, but with all the characters in Remedy's games.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the pain in the butt. Pain to the max.
You're killing me. Did you make that up yourselves, or you get some wino downstairs to come up with it?
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end.
The dialogue Sam writes is over the top and goofy, and it helps for the more light-hearted moments. Obviously, Sam does take his stories seriously, but he likes to make them over the top and crazy with either the world itself or the characters, which is ripe for comedic relief or goofy moments.
There was something disturbingly familiar about the letter before me. The handwriting was all pretty curves.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air, glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
Writer, goddammit.
Correct!
If I just wanted to, I could write 10 books a year. And they'd be the best books that year.
No, you couldn't.
That's right, I couldn't. But I could.
It's why things such as the ashtray maze in Control is so over-the-top silly, yet it fits within the world because the game establishes its craziness. I mean, there is a quest in that game where you hunt a rubber duck. A rubber duck! Or the silly moments in Alan Wake work because Bright Falls is a location that brings fiction into the real world, and the game itself parodies popular works by Stephen King. Or Max Payne's carrot face in the first game. It works so well because of how over-exaggerated the rest of the game is with its noir elements. Same with the TV shows in the sequel. I could talk about Sam's writing all day, but I'll keep it to just a few brief examples. Basically, Sam likes to take serious stories and tell them in crazy and silly ways that fits thematically. I have no issue with taking Remedy's games seriously, but I always do laugh when their games make fun of themselves. Now, where am I going with all this? The issue of Quantum Break is that the story takes itself very seriously and is lacking some of the wackiness Sam brings to Remedy's games. I'm all for taking a game seriously, but there are almost no moments of downtime or a breath of light-hearted fresh air, and even when the game does it, it feels hugely out of place because the game is trying to make you take itself seriously. But then you have Alan Wake 2 Easter eggs or a Night Springs episode which changes the tone to a comedic one, and it just takes me out of the game because it doesn't fit.
And yet, that is the fate that awaits you in Night Fringe.
It's Night Springs.
Night Cringe.
Springs.
Bright Blings.
Night Springs.
Fright. Whinge.
Jesus.
Because Remedy's previous games were silly, any light-hearted moments fit smoothly into the game. They don't here. Also, the dialogue in this game is used only to advance the story, whereas the dialogue in previous games advanced the story and also developed the characters, the world, and explored many mythological parallels to the story. Quantum Break doesn't have any of that. Another issue with the storytelling is the pacing. Despite being a game all about time and beating time, the game's pace crawls along. Act 2 of the game is entirely pointless and could have been avoided if Jack just waited until the stutter was over. The first two parts are pointless. All we get is a big set piece that doesn't advance the story. It isn't until part 3 of Act 2 where the story kicks in, and even then it's just a walking segment. Act 3 has Jack just go grab a device for Beth and then go get Sophia Amaral. Despite these being trivial goals, they are spread out for an entire act. It's why the middle of the game is the weakest part. Not a lot is progressed, and it just feels like the game was stretching itself out to be over 10 hours. It's why I agree with the statement that Quantum Break has a great story, but the storytelling is bad. Although, since I have been negative on the game for a bit, I'll talk about one of my favourite aspects: the time travel. Time travel is one of the hardest things to do in fiction. Even some of my favourite time travel movies create paradoxes and inconsistencies with their rules of time travel. Quantum Break chooses to go with quantum physics and a closed loop with time travel. Basically, going back in time to change an event will only cause it to happen in the first place.
I've been to the past. I've tried to change things, undo mistakes, only to find there's no changing the inevitable. Time is just one closed loop. No matter what I do, you and I, we always end up here. And no matter what I do, time ends.
This makes the time travel more interesting because it can't be used the way it is traditionally used in movies. Jack can't go back in time to stop Paul because that will only cause the event to happen in the first place. The only semi-exception to this rule is Jack going back in time to save his brother, but even that is explained as Will's death being an illusion, and that he never really died. I also do like the time machine itself and its corridor design. If you walk through the circle clockwise, then you go forward in time. If you go anti-clockwise, then you go back in time. So overall, the time travel is both cool, unique, and adheres to its rules very well. I still have to discuss the TV show, right? Quantum Break has 4 TV episodes after the first 4 acts, and your choices in the game impact the show. The show focuses more on the villains and Monarch and fleshing them out more. I think it was a smart idea to not feature the major game characters that much in the show, and to not feature the major TV show characters that much in the game, since both mediums flesh out different characters. The show overall is okay, it's well directed and well acted, but the low budget of it really shows. Pun intended. It's not a super low budget, and it's clear that the production of the show was well thought out, but some of the effects do look a bit fake, and during the car chase in the first episode, none of the cars take damage apart from one which is a small dent and a cheap repair. It's also apparent with the editing, as fight scenes are edited in that quick cut montage style where it's hard to get a grasp on what the fuck is going on. Guys, John Wick released 2 years prior to this game, and you have an actor from those films in this very game. Don't you think you should have taken some inspiration? Obviously, John Wick isn't the be-all and end-all of action scenes, but it showed that you didn't have to use quick cuts to make a fight scene intense, and you could actually show the action. What's the point in a fight scene where I can't tell what's going on? I'm not immersed in the fight, I'm distracted by all the quick cuts. The thing is that doing quick cuts is cheaper than doing long takes, and so this was probably done for budget reasons, rather than an artistic choice. But my point is that if you can't do a fight scene properly, then just don't do it. Apart from the special effects and the action scenes, the production quality in these episodes is quite good, and helps flesh out the inner workings of Monarch. Charlie Winscott is a character I hated at the beginning. I thought he was going to be a super annoying nerdy arsehole, but by the end he was my favourite character in the show. He's confused and scared and just wants to be done with this whole situation.
Fiona.
Hey, bud. Where you going?
You're right. Time's ending, just like you said. And the lifeboat protocol? It's a place. They built it to protect people from the fracture. And the only problem is there's a list, and anyone who's not on it is pretty much fucked. But if we make it back to the mainland, I can get us on the list. All of us.
This entire island is on lockdown. How are we gonna do that, Charlie?
There's a tunnel.
Hey, all right, if you are lying to me this time, I swear to God.
Get off! Tired of this shit. I don't know why you're doing this, but I don't have to put your name on shit, motherfucker.
What'd you do to him?
He's fine.
William Burke is okay. He doesn't really have anything interesting behind him, and most scenes with him are cringeworthy.
Please, this is not who I am. This is not. I'm telling you, I never felt good doing this. I never felt good doing this. But it's the only thing I knew how to do.
And when I got back, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything to do. And Monarch, they found that useful, and they put me to work. And I swear to God, I couldn't stand being alone. So every Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I would walk down the street because it was the only 2 nights at the bartender. She wasn't at school. And I told myself every night to ask you out. It took me a fucking year. But Emily, if Monarch, if they gave me structure, you give me purpose.
I also dislike the way his character is handled and the disjointedness between the TV show and the game. In the TV show, one of the options leads to Paul manipulating Burke into fighting for Monarch, and then teasing the fact that you have to fight this character you have been on this journey with for the last 10 hours. But then in the game you can kill him in less than 20 seconds. On hard mode.
Have it your way.
Of course.
Oh, great.
Wow, what a great send-off to the character. Yeah, guys. What's also annoying is that the TV show is tied to a streaming service, and it means if you have bad internet, then you can get fucked. Why couldn't they just put the TV show as MP4 files or WMV files in the game? Why tie it to a streaming service? It can't be to save on memory because Quantum Break is 70 gigabytes. 70 gigabytes! If anyone can explain why the episodes are tied to a streaming service, that would be appreciated. The thing is that I don't even think the TV show is necessary. The most emotional and best story moments are in Act 4, all of which are in-game, and the performances in the game are just as well captured as they are in live action. And considering how photorealistic the graphics are, do you really need a TV show? I don't think so. It was an interesting experiment to combine a TV show and a video game, but it was ultimately unneeded. I appreciate the effort they went to, but I don't believe it enhances the game in any way. So in conclusion, Quantum Break has a great story and an interesting take on time travel with interesting characters, all of which have interesting conflicts and interactions. However, the writing takes itself too seriously, the collectibles add nothing of value, the TV show is an interesting experiment, but once again adds nothing of value, and the game suffers from pacing issues. What I'll say is that Quantum Break's gameplay sucks, but its story is worth experiencing. I think the best way to experience the story is watching all the cutscenes and story segments on YouTube. That way, you don't have to deal with the crappy combat, and instead can just enjoy the story, because what's here is great, but it isn't worth the slog of gameplay required to get to it. The soundtrack for Quantum Break is another step down from Remedy's previous games. Pete Lanko, the composer for Alan Wake, returned for this game. I love Alan Wake's soundtrack. It has a variety of tracks, all of which capture the tone and mood of each scene perfectly. And they do reuse the tracks throughout the game, but the tracks are tied to specific characters, items, or story beats, and so repeating the themes helps you connect with those events more. Now, Quantum Break's music isn't bad by any means. When listening to the soundtrack on its own, it sounds pretty awesome. but only a few of the tracks mix well with the cutscenes, and there was nothing memorable apart from the main menu music. But all the gameplay tracks and cutscene tracks all sound the same, so there isn't really one track that stands out. Another issue with the gameplay music is that specific sound cues are tied to the abilities you use in gameplay, and so using a specific power will trigger different sounds and distorted tracks. The issue is that because of how frequently you use time abilities, the distortion effects overpower the music, so the music may as well not even be there. I feel like this is a trap a lot of developers fall into nowadays with soundtracks, where they don't want the music to be too distracting during gameplay or cutscenes, and instead just make it background noise. The issue is that the entire point of having music play during these parts is to enhance the experience. Music alone is able to make you feel certain emotions, so when you combine it on top of visuals, sound effects, gameplay, acting, whatever, it is able to create emotions that only a work of art can. Music shouldn't just be a background element, it should enhance the gameplay and cutscenes. By reducing it to a background element, you are limiting its potential as a storytelling and gameplay device. During cutscenes, certain tracks can help you feel the emotions the characters are feeling, and during gameplay, certain tracks can help hype you up and get your blood pumping to feel the intensity of the action. I never felt that with Quantum Break though. The music just felt thrown in and not essential. It's a shame because Remedy's previous games have amazing soundtracks that all help build tone, drive the action, and express a character's emotion and personality. I don't get any of that with Quantum Break. Soundtracks are very important in video games, and I'm tired of so many games treating them as a last-minute element. Another disappointing thing is that there isn't a Poets of the Fall song, which is the only Remedy game since Max Payne 2 to not feature one. Sam Lake did confirm that the song Labyrinth by Poets of the Fall was going to be in the game, but it didn't happen because of some contractual complications. Which is strange because there is plenty of licensed music in the game and none of it fits.
I'm in a mess, I can't help it. I just go round and round. I'm paranoid, I'm selfish. Push me, I climb up, I'm shellfish. We had a dream, I shelved it. That eats me up, that's Elvis. Las Vegas, Sarah, I'm half bag lady, half Bagheera. I got my hand on my heart, but my heart's in the gutter. Talking to itself, starting to flutter when it thinks about yours. Barking at much like a nutter, trying to start wars on the bus.
Alan Wake's licensed music fit the game because the songs focused on different perceptions of reality, which fit the story in the game. Quantum Break's music is just a bunch of random contemporary tracks.
Don't try to take this from me. Don't try to take this from me now. Don't try to take this from me. Don't try to take this from me now. Feels like I'm waking from the dead, and everyone's been waiting on me.
Overall, Quantum Break's soundtrack is competent, but it doesn't pack any punch behind it. I don't know if it's due to the music itself or the way it's used in the game, but it is a massive step down from both Alanco's and Remedy's previous output. In conclusion, Quantum Break is a mediocre at best, abysmal at worst game. The gameplay is boring as hell, with it being too easy, having repetitive enemy encounters, clunky mechanics, and having so little gameplay that it may as well be a movie. The story is really good though, with a great overarching narrative, along with solid characters and performances by the actors, but it has issues with its storytelling, and the music is forgettable. Making this video depresses me because, as anyone who has been watching my channel for a long time knows, I love Remedy. Remedy's games are wonderful works of art, and I have spent countless hours playing them. I haven't with Quantum Break, however. It genuinely saddens me that I didn't enjoy a Remedy game, and that I don't recommend playing it. However, Remedy did redeem themselves 3 years later with Control. I won't talk too much about that game since I do have future plans for it, so I'll just say that it does everything monumentally better than Quantum Break. It has issues, but it's actually fun to play. Unlike QB. At the end of the day though, there is no question that this is Remedy's weakest game, and I can understand the dislike and reputation for it. thankfully Remedy learned from their mistakes.
Time is a wraith at the point of no return, a memory of the light of day. Time is a blaze, and so we burn until the ashes of our lives are blown away. Wish I had the power to make you stay. For the sake of the real, would you